Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Rosie here, and I play Dead by Daylight, so you don't have to. Just doing more screwing around with this here perk creator here, bruh. So I kind of wanted to go over something I wanted to talk about for a little bit, and that is, something that I have waited for in this game for a very long time, and I believe is now actually upon us. And that is the long-awaited fall of one corrupt intervention. Corrupt intervention as a perk in this game has been absolutely dominant ever since its release, in all honesty. Ever since its release, it has been one of the best perks in Dead by Daylight for the fact that it corrects a horrific mathematical imbalance that takes place in the early game of Dead by Daylight. And that mathematical imbalance that they have over you in the early game, especially when you're on like a standard 115 killer, that mathematical imbalance is so bad that it's horrible that it does bleed into the late game. The idea, the myth of a killer snowball in the late game, it's just that, it's a myth. You can make it happen against people that suck, but we don't analyze for people that suck, do we? That's not what we do here. You can basically beat anybody that's bad. But if they are good, the mathematical injustice that does take place in the early game, the fact that they have so much more pressure than you at the start of the match, spawn points, and other factors that lead into various problems on the killer side, that can bleed into a game state where the survivors seize control initially and never let that control go. Because they seize control first, it's not really a fair 50-50 fight at the start of the game. They seize an early game initiative that you can't really catch up to as the game of Dead by Daylight progresses. They will get all the gens done, usually before you can do anything. This is what is referred to as a gen rush. When they seize that early game initiative very quickly, and it doesn't let it go. So, obviously, Corrupt making that mathematical injustice a little bit better was always something that is appealing, especially on characters like a Trapper or a Myers or a Hag, characters that have to actually set up at the start of the game. And the 2 minutes was a long time. The perk obviously then took a nerf a couple years ago during the MMR days of Dead by Daylight, where when MMR was in the game actually working and it was getting all the meta perks nerfed. Corrupt Intervention, being one of those meta perks, received a nerf. And its nerf was a very light slap on the wrist, where you still get the 2 minutes, but as soon as you down a survivor, that ended. The perk now shuts off. So here is the issue with Corrupt Interventions. We are in a different state of the game where things are a little bit different now. Okay, we'll go into exactly what some of the things that have caused everything to change around it are. The very first thing is that while Corrupt Intervention itself has seen no additional nerfs itself, the environment around it has significantly changed. And what you see here is the previous version of full gen control. If you were a killer that did, like a knight or somebody that didn't really need a chase perk, like a knight, somebody or a top tier, this is kind of what gen control would look like. Pop being at 30%, eruption, pain reso being at 25%, and if you were on a killer like a Wesker, or a better, like a mid to high tier character, a Wesker, a Pyramid, something like this was very, very effective at getting an early down and getting the most bang for your buck at actually controlling gens. But obviously, the times they are a-changing, and this is not good anymore. What the devs ended up doing was they ripped Pop Goes the Weasel away from you. Right? Pop Goes the Weasel is not there anymore. They reduced it back from 30 back down to 20. This nerf may seem inconsequential to Corrupt's place in the meta, but I would argue that it's actually very big. They also nerfed Pain Reso in the same patch, and they nerfed it by 5% as well. So that means every action that you take with these two perks dropped in value. Okay? So what's the main thing there? One thing you'll notice is that Scourge Hook survived an eruption despite the fact that it is only 10%. It also survived. Pop did not. Why did Pop not survive? Why did Pop not survive this nerf for most of the roster? Pop did not survive the nerf because you actually have to walk up to a generator and kick it. That is why it's dead. That is why it did not survive. Because it is a bigger time commitment to go and actually proc. You need the most value possible there. 22.5% is not enough value. Even if the gen is at 4 pistons, that's just not enough value. Because you're losing time to actually go to that gen and kick it. So for somebody like a Ghostface or a Myers, that time it should be better spent doing something else. So Pop did not survive the nerf. Okay? Now, honestly, if you look at M1 Killer, this here was an M2 Killer build, and I stressed that earlier. Because M1 was kind of doing something different. M1 needed a chase perk in there too. M1 kind of gave up Eruption for a chase perk like Play With Your Food or Save the Best for Last when that was good, to maximize to band-aid their power. Freddy Krueger needs a band-aid for the fact that his power doesn't work. So Save the Best for Last was being that band-aid. Play With Your Food is that band-aid in the game's current shape. So an M1 Killer build looked more like this back in the day, where Play With Your Food was acting as a band-aid fix to the fact that the power doesn't work. Okay? Here is the thing, though. Corrupt has always had some weaknesses on its own. Like this has nothing to do with Corrupt yet, but we're getting there. Corrupt Intervention has always had some weaknesses in the fact that it can be stealthed out. Okay? And one of Corrupt's biggest strengths has always been the non-coordination of Survivor teams, aka little pub stompy, when you really think about it. Why is Corrupt a little pub stompy? Because what Corrupt relies on is the fact, of course, sometimes you just get good spawns, like the 3 gens are blocked off, you go to a close gen, there's somebody there, but so like that, it helped you out. But in sometimes, like, the very first problem with Corrupt is that you'll walk in and sometimes you'll just get a bad spawn. Like, you'll plop in the middle of the map, and the corrupted gens will be blocked in a way where they can still theoretically be around the entire board. And that can happen at a map like Azrov's, where if you drop in at Azrov's resting place in the middle of the map, 2 gens are blocked on one side and one's blocked on the other, they can still split the map very early, correct? Like, if you have 2 gens blocked on the wrong side and there's 2, like, you know how it'd be. If you've ran Corrupt, you know. That's an issue. And then secondly, it's a little pub stompy because, again, it's a perk that capitalizes very much on the non-coordination of teams. Where if a team is not doing, like, if a solo queue group, one member of the person goes, I'm going to stealth out Corrupt, and another person goes, I'm going to go to the other gen, that lack of coordination means the team unit doesn't really have a plan in that situation. Meaning you could go find the guy that went to the gen and smack them and actually down them, and they ended up losing time, and you have a down already because they didn't know how to attack Corrupt accordingly. However, if you are facing a Survive with Friends that has a coordinated plan for how they personally deal with Corrupt Intervention, where if they're going to walk around or deal with it for 2 minutes, or they identify that you're a weak killer, they're going, okay, we can slam through it, because Corrupt can be slammed through if you get a bad spawn or a very coordinated team. Corrupt can still be slammed through. The potential to have a bad early game is still there, even with Corrupt Intervention in play at its full 2 minutes. And so, Corrupt doesn't even fully bleed, like, it doesn't even slap a band-aid over the full mathematical problem that is early game. Okay? And herein lies the issue. When Corrupt was being supported by things like Ruin, Remember Ruin at 200%, Undying, and Pop Goes the Weasel at full power. When Corrupt is being supported by a very powerful system that can control gens, that is when it is at its best. When Corrupt is there to block up a couple gens at the start until you get your broken combination, for lack of a better word, broken combination of gen perks that have good synergy working, aka Ruin, Undying, Pop. Corrupt was a natural final slot there. Correct? However, in this current meta, Corrupt does not really have the broken combination of gen perks that it really needs to function. What do we got? We got Pain Reso still at 20%. Pain Resonance has survived. Eruption has also survived. So Eruption is back in there. The problem is Pain Reso and Eruption are not a good enough. These are the two best gen perks. This is not a system that helps you control gens adequately. It is not. Especially if you're M1 Killer. Now, M2 Killer is different. M2 Killer, this is my next video I'm going to make, so a little preview, can actually get good value out of the Oppression perk. Because they, number one, if the killer is really good, they don't need a chase perk. Like somebody like a Nurse Blight or Spirit doesn't need an actual chase perk. And even other M2 killers can drop Play With Your Food, and then they can get an extra slot there anyway, and they can get good value out of Oppression. And then, so if you're running, like, Pain Reso, Eruption, and Oppression, then Corrupt could feasibly be your final slot. However, the main... Another thing that has come up is, like, Play With Your Food is still an extremely good perk. Okay, so Play With Your Food is still working. And then you have something like this. Well, again, this isn't really a system to control gens. However, what you will find is another strategy has really risen to prominence in the killer metagame, especially now that gen control is dead, pretty much. A full gen control build on an M1 killer doesn't really work anymore. So the strategy that has risen into prominence and is likely on its way out the door, because it will be nerfed, is Endgame, where we got the combination of Rancor, Game Afoot, Remember Me, and No Way Out. This build is the meta build. If you are trying to defeat a 4-man Survive with Friends group as anybody, this is the best build in the game at doing so. This is the build in the game that is best equipped right now to defeat 4-man Swift. And even then, it does capitalize on their ignorance of what you're doing. It capitalizes on them being ignorant of what you're doing. So there are some holes here. A dedicated Swift that knows they're playing against this can likely strategize about the best way to deal with it. And also, it is a tunnel build. So if you can't execute a tunnel, like if you get like a really bad map, or if you're like a bitch boy on Larry's or something, you still might have problems. But this is the best build in the game. And if you've ran this build, or if you've seen this build run, you know why. Because of its insane ability to force ties and turn losses into ties, turn ties into wins, etc., etc. And this build cannot, like, there's nothing that Solo and Swift can really do that's different from each other to counter this. That's another reason that it's actually very good. But what this build has taught you is that gens can a generator, like, leaving you can be a resource. Generators leaving can actually be a resource. And that has led to the rise of a different perk. And I really think that this perk, the rise of this perk has assured Corrupt's future as not good. And that perk is Coup de Grace. Coup de Grace has risen very far. Since it's, I remember they when it came out, it was like 100% in the PCB, then it was nerfed to 60, and then it was buffed to go to 80, and then it was buffed to get 2 tokens per gen. The rise of Coup de Grace has sealed Corrupt's fate, because if you are an M1 killer and you have play with your food, and coup de grace. If you have play with your food and coup de grace, you will down survivors. They cannot not get downed with this combination. If you have 2 stacks of play with your food and a token of coup de grace, and you can't get that survivor, you blow. Now again, I'm not saying that this build is gonna help you defeat Swift. Again, we've already discussed what the meta build is, and that's the end game. If you're trying to defeat Survive with friends, the build to run is the end game build. However, in terms of corrupt intervention and gen control, we have now learned of a set of chase perks on M1 that can actively down, but in one of those chase perks requires gens to fall to make that happen. So the fact that you don't have a system to control them, to only lose 2 or 3 in a match, doesn't matter anymore, because now you can run a Scourge Hook Pain Resonance. And this is what I do. Like if you come on my streams, you see this is what I do on M1. Now you can run a Scourge Hook Pain Resonance and Eruption, not planning to keep 3 gens. Each gem being popped is a resource for you to initiate a coup de grace play, right? And then if you're Pyramid Head or something, and you have an actual power that you don't need a play with your food, well, that's when a perk like Oppression can come in and fill the last slot there. This is what I just ran on Wesker right before making this video, and I actually really like this. I actually quite enjoy this. And then if you're on a character, like if you have such a mastery of a killer that where you don't need the chase perk, that is when Corrupt can come back into the fold there and be your last slot. But at that point, do you even want it? Is my question. Like, if you are Wesker, and you have such a mastery with the character, do you even need Corrupt Intervention at that point? Or would you rather slap on something else, like a Discordance, or even something like a Hex Ruin, or a No Way Out, or like anything, or anything. Like Corrupt is one of the most boring perks to use, and we've all understand that and have understood that for a while now. Or a Deadlock, or anything, right? Like, why at that point would you want to, if you know that you're going to get it down, and if you're good with Wesker, you can get that down in like 50 seconds. Why do you need that? Just something to think about there. And so that's kind of that kind of Corrupt's future spot. Now again, Corrupt is still a good perk and better than most of the shit in the game. But the fact is, now that Endgame has the rise of Endgame to meta status, as well as Gen Control's nerf and then the 2 best perks are, I would not describe these 2, even these 3, as a full system to actually control gens against above average teams, like our past builds were capable of doing. It's I just don't think that Corrupt is helping you anymore as much, because you're not trying to delay until an actual system of gem perks gets working. The closest thing we have to an actual system of gem perks are these 3, I would argue. But again, I don't think these 3 warrant a Corrupt Intervention's usage unless you're on a character like the Knight, who is the character that doesn't really need coup de grace by the nature of how his chase power works. But that's about where I am in my thought process here. I just kind of wanted to make that video because, as y'all know, I've been dying to see Corrupt Intervention die, lack of a better word, and I think we are finally at that day. So, there we go. I'm getting the hell out of here. GG's.